When he put his hands on my face, I felt a connection to something that felt much larger than him, much larger than me, and most importantly, much larger than the pain that I was experiencing. That I just had this knowing that I wanted to learn more about what Reiki was. So traditional Reiki can be traced back to a Japanese mystic named Mikao Usui, who lived in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And the word Reiki actually is most commonly translated from Japanese as universal life force energy. But if you look at the Japanese kanji, you can also translate it as divine life force energy, which is more how I resonate with it. Reiki came to the West and to the United States shortly before World War II from a Japanese-American woman named Hawaii Takata, who had studied Reiki in Japan and brought it to the US. In traditional Reiki, there's usually taught as either a 3 or a 4 degree system. The 4th degree in some modalities is also taught as a 3rd degree, so that's it can be a little bit confusing. But in the 1st degree, basically one receives an initiation from a Reiki master, and during that initiation, which is commonly called an attunement, sacred Reiki symbols are put into a person's crown chakra at the top of the head and also into the hands, and that opens one up to the flow of the Reiki energy. During the training, you would also then learn different hand positions for doing a treatment on yourself and different hand positions for doing a treatment on another person. If one was to progress deeper into the lineage and go for the 2nd degree initiation, they would again have more sacred symbols put into the crown chakra and also into the hands, and they would learn 3 of those symbols, one of which makes the energy flow stronger, another of which allows you to focus it for mental emotional healing, and a 3rd of which allows you to send it distantly through time and space. In the training that I received, it was taught as a 3 degree system. So at the 3rd level was the master level. So you basically receive another initiation, and then you learn all of those different symbols and sort of the sequencing of those symbols in order to initiate others, and basically how to turn that light switch on in another person's energy field. Again, there are some schools that break that up into 2 parts, so you often hear it taught as a 4 degree system, but the essential teachings are pretty much the same whether it's taught as a 3 or 4 degree system. And Reiki's kind of exploded recently in terms of, it can often be found as a form of palliative care in some more progressive hospitals. So it is starting to get some notice in the more sort of Western medical model, and has just increased in popularity on an exponential sense. The initiation, the attunement, it actually changes your own energetic vibration, so that in itself is a very powerful healing. And the ability for pretty much anyone to do Reiki who's willing to go through the training and receive the attunement is really a beautiful aspect of it, because it makes it much more democratic in terms of very accessible to anyone. The experience of Reiki can be really all over the map, and I think it's important for people to recognize that there's going to be some segment of the population that maybe has experiences similar to what I do, where I'm feeling like a profound sense of spiritual connection. There's another aspect of the population that might have more visual experiences, where it's really like they're seeing, different colors, and some people even might see spirit guides or angels and things of that nature. There's some who might have a more subtle experience of that, just feeling a sense of warmth and tingling. And there's also a certain segment of the population that's going to feel absolutely nothing at all. And in some New Age circles, I've noticed that there can be this emphasis that I think is actually unfortunate, and almost perhaps even damaging, where there's this sense of judgment towards people who don't feel the energy, or who don't have the light show experience of the energy. And this sort of attachment, or this, what I feel is a misunderstanding, that somehow there's some connection between how spiritual you are and how much you're feeling the energy. And to me, I really think, to be quite honest, that that's just BS. Because I've known some people who are very, very psychic and very able to feel energy, who maybe weren't the most spiritually evolved people, maybe even a little manipulative at times. And I've also known some other people who feel the energy zip. They don't feel any of it, and yet they use it on themselves, they see the sense of growth, and they're actually very wonderful, beautiful people. There's one student of mine who I taught all the way up through the master level in Reiki, who never felt the energy. He still doesn't, to this day, feel the energy. And yet he's a beautiful soul, he's a beautiful teacher. And if anything, because he has to really go totally into that place of surrender and trust, because he's not feeling it, people that go to him actually find that he's one of the more powerful healers, because he's so in a place of surrender. So I think it's really important to note that the experience of the energy is going to be whatever it is for you, and to not really have a lot of judgment around that. What one should pay attention to is what kind of things happen for you in the days or in the weeks after receiving a treatment. Because I think of it like taking a vitamin. If you take it once, first of all, you're probably not going to feel the kinds of things that one might expect to feel with Reiki. But if you make it a regular practice, you might start to notice that you feel better. You might start to notice that your body is getting into a healthier place. So I think the same litmus test should exist for Reiki. You know, if you use it as a regular practice, do you start to feel more authentic in who you are? Do you start to feel better on a physical, mental, and emotional level? Does your life start to improve? And really let that be more the indicator than whether you're having these sensations or not. One of my dear friends who uses a lot of my techniques often likes to share this story where her husband was doing some work on the roof and actually fell off the roof, had major damage to his entire rib cage. And as she was with him in the ambulance going to the hospital, she kept using a lot of these Reiki crystal techniques. Particularly, she would use the Reiki technique of creating what I call a Reiki hologram, which is kind of like an energetic replication of a particular organ or organ system. So she kept repeatedly putting Reiki holograms of her husband's rib cage in perfect health, and just kept repeating that on the ambulance ride over to the emergency room. And the doctors were amazed when they both got there. It's not that his ribs weren't still damaged, obviously they were, but they were really challenged to kind of be able to comprehend that he wasn't in the extreme level of pain that they thought somebody should be for this kind of injury. And he also healed much faster in the coming weeks after that. So those kinds of techniques can be quite powerful. Also, I often teach this as an R&R class at the Omega Institute where I work. And I've had many times where I'm doing these group healings, which is another beautiful facet of the Reiki Crystal, that you can work on many people simultaneously. So I'll be working on 20 or 30 people at a time. And I've often had people at the end of a healing say, wow, you know, this pain that I've had in my neck for the last 5 years feels gone now. Now, did it stay gone in the days after they left? I don't know. Hopefully it did. But those kinds of profound experiences really bring me a sense of joy in sharing this work with the public. So on the physical body, it really is working both on the physical level, on the cellular level, but it's also working on the energetic level, so it's working on both. True, it's not necessarily going to solve every physical issue. When I come into a healing and I'm working on somebody, what I really look at is Reiki being a piece of a larger puzzle. So for example, if I'm doing a healing on somebody who has a really horrible diet and is continually doing things that maybe counteract what's happening energetically, then that person's healing is going to be limited on that level. The flip side of that, if somebody's doing a number of other things in terms of taking care of themselves on an emotional level, on what they put into their bodies, in terms of their food, etc., then certainly the Reikis are going to have a more pronounced effect. One thing that pretty much all Reiki masters and all Reiki teachers that I've worked with have a common understanding is that Reiki is always going to be working for the highest good. So you as a practitioner don't need to interpret, you don't need to try to, what's the word I'm looking for, diagnose. You're not being a diagnostic practitioner. You're really just kind of letting the energy flow and getting out of the way, because the Reiki has its own intelligence and it's going to go where it needs to go and do what it needs to do, which is one of the really beautiful things about it. You just really kind of need to put your hands there and just let the energy move and then get out of the way, if anything else. So for me, Reiki really came to me through what was a really very challenging dental experience. I was having a wisdom tooth pulled at the NYU Dental Center. I wasn't, that wealthy, so I had to go to basically a student-run clinic run by NYU. So basically I had a student working on my mouth, pulling a wisdom tooth, and he was incredibly rough and somewhat abrasive in his personality, and it was a very traumatic experience. After that, I probably looked like I'd been in a boxing match with Muhammad Ali or something. My jaw was incredibly swollen. I was in an incredible amount of pain. And I happened to have a roommate who happened to be a Reiki practitioner. Now, he never talked about Reiki, he had no idea what Reiki was, but when he saw me come home that day, he immediately offered to do a Reiki treatment on me. And when he put his hands on my face, I felt a connection to something that felt much larger than him, much larger than me, and perhaps most importantly, much larger than the pain that I was experiencing. And it really allowed me to go into this place of surrender and grace, that I just had this knowing that I wanted to learn more about what Reiki was. So it was about 2 weeks later that I got my first degree initiation, and then from there it just accelerated. At that point in my life, I was also pretty much struggling. I had come from a very abusive childhood, and I had done traditional therapy and maybe a little bit of shamanic work, and those things were all beneficial. But once I got the energetic tools of Reiki, I noticed my own healing accelerated in a profound way. So the Reiki crystal, maybe I should explain a little bit more in terms of what it is. It feels to me like it was more of a discovery, not something I created. And it was literally in the winter of 2007. I was traveling in Asia. I was in Luang Prabang, beautiful, what used to be the royal capital of Laos. And while I was there, I was actually working on the final edits of my first book, The Reiki Magic Guide to Self-Attunement. And while I was working on that, one day, again, I was totally traveling alone, went to this small little Indian food place and was sitting there by myself, eating my food, and I felt this incredible presence appear next to me at the table. And I just had this knowing, this sensation that was the spirit of Mikao Usui, the founder of Reiki. During that experience, I felt this beautiful ball of white light come from him into the area of my heart chakra. And I didn't fully comprehend what that was. I just thought, wow, this is kind of a neat experience, a nice energetic blessing. Had no idea in terms of the depth of what I had been given. In the weeks after that, though, I did notice that I was downloading a lot of information and even some different Reiki symbols that became the information of my second book, Reiki for Spiritual Healing, but I still had no idea of anything that I would call a Reiki crystal. And it wasn't until about a year later, tuning in, that I really came to the realization that that wasn't just a ball of white light, that it was actually an energetic crystal that had been placed in the area of my heart chakra that I could then work with energetically. And so I began to work with that and noticed that basically the changes were quite profound, that I basically was in psychic communication with that divine consciousness that is in that crystal, and that I could send Reiki treatments, or basically have the crystal send Reiki treatments as easily as a thought or a whisper, simply just mentally talking to this crystal or verbally talking to this crystal, and that it would send the energy wherever I wanted it to go. And that it could also shape that energy in ways that wouldn't be normal in traditional Reiki. So for me, it was just a really beautiful and amazing tool that I'm really glad to be able to share with as many people as possible. So the Reiki crystal is an energetic crystal. If you could think of a crystal on an energetic level that's sitting in front of your heart chakra, made out of that divine light that is Reiki. And because the belief in Reiki is that the energy has its own intelligence, its own consciousness, essentially, you can then communicate with that energetic crystal that is made out of that light and made out of that consciousness. So it's a much more user-friendly tool in terms of Reiki, and it's just much more accessible than in terms of traditional Reiki training. And what it allows you to do, basically, is to bypass some of the more complex Reiki symbols, as well as the sequencing of hand positions, and just allows you basically to directly communicate with that Reiki crystal and just ask it to send Reiki wherever you're wanting it to send, on the physical level, on the emotional level, the energetic bodies, and even long distance if you're setting a distant treatment to a family member, perhaps. What I've seen with the Reiki crystal is a really profound acceleration in terms of the depth of where people can go, because it can do things that traditional Reiki cannot. So there's a lot of tools that exist within the Reiki crystal that are not a part of traditional Reiki training. For example, in traditional Reiki training, you would think of Reiki as just being a constant flow of energy that you can modulate a little bit with the different symbols, but even with that, it's still always going to be a flowing of energy. Whereas with the Reiki crystal, you can basically literally shape the energy. There's tools in there that I call like a Reiki laser technique. There's what I call a Reiki hologram technique. There's the ability to open up what I call Reiki portals. And so that really just provides a much more rich opportunity to address whatever the energetic equation is that you're trying to bring about in the healing. So you just basically have more tools under your belt. And they're very accessible because it's really just communicating directly with this divine consciousness that is in that Reiki crystal that's sitting in front of your heart chakra.